Tonight, we journey deep beneath the surface of the world, into a place where time no longer seems to move forward, but circles softly around itself, like echoes whispered through stone. There, in the quiet heart of the earth, lies a forgotten cavern whose walls hold something more than age or dust. They hold memory and something waiting to awaken. This is the Cave of Painted Shadows, when the walls began to move. Long ago, travelers spoke of a hidden hollow where the air shimmered with the scent of damp clay and iron, and where ancient figures painted by hands lost to history seemed to stir in the flicker of lamplight. Some said it was illusion, others a haunting. Yet all agreed, once you stepped inside, you felt the cave was watching you back. So settle in, wherever you are in the world tonight. If you're joining from the United States, perhaps the evening is drawing its first dark curtains across the sky. If you're listening from Europe, the midnight hour may already have its quiet hold on you. And for those far across the oceans where dawn waits just beyond the horizon, let this be a gentle bridge between night and morning. Take a deep breath, dim the lights, let your thoughts fall away like dust from an ancient ceiling. The story will unfold slowly, quietly, like the sound of water tracing the walls of time. And before we begin, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more midnight journeys, and leave a comment. Perhaps tell us where in the world you're listening from and what time the story found you. Now close your eyes, or simply let them rest, and listen as we descend step by careful step into the earth's secret heart. The air is cool, the light dim, and the story begins. The entrance to the cave was barely a mouth, half hidden beneath a spill of moss and root, like the earth itself wished to forget it was there. The archaeologist, Marianne Voss, knelt before it in the hush of early dawn. Mist clung to the valley floor, and her breath came in clouds that wove with the grey. For months she had followed faint traces through forgotten maps and oral tales told by shepherds, stories of a painted cavern sealed by landslides, waiting to be rediscovered. She brushed her gloved hand across the stone, feeling the cold seep into her skin. There was no wind here, only the low hum of the forest, as though the trees themselves were listening. Behind her, her small team waited, 3 others, all quiet now. The usual chatter of an expedition had fallen away when they saw the opening. It was too small to inspire confidence, too dark to invite comfort. Yet, something about it pulled at the mind, the way a shadow sometimes draws your eye more than the light beside it. Marianne adjusted her headlamp and crawled inside. At first, the tunnel was narrow, tight enough that the scrape of her pack brushed the ceiling. The scent was thick and old, a mingling of minerals and damp soil, and as her light swept across the stone, it picked out veins of ochre and faint lines of what might once have been tool marks. The air grew colder with each movement forward, pressing against her skin in slow, invisible waves. Then, without warning, the tunnel widened. She felt it before she saw it, the subtle shift of air, the echo that followed her breath. The beam of her lamp revealed a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. The walls, slick with moisture, shimmered faintly as though coated in a thin film of light itself. "Lights on," she whispered, and the others followed her voice. One by one, their headlamps flickered to life, tracing arcs of brightness across the cavern walls. And there, just beyond the reach of the first lamp, she saw them, figures, dozens of them, painted in shades of ochre, black, and rust red. Men and beasts, spirals and hands, lines that might have been rivers or dreams. The images overlapped in strange layers, some sharp and new-looking, others fading into the rock like ghosts retreating from sight. But as she watched, something about them shifted. It was not motion exactly, not like the flutter of fabric or the turn of a head. It was subtler, quieter, like the way a reflection trembles when a ripple touches water. Marianne blinked, adjusted her light, and the shapes stilled again. Yet her pulse had already changed, slow, heavy, uncertain. Somewhere behind her, one of the team whispered, "Did anyone else see that?" The sound of their voice echoed long after it should have faded, multiplying softly across the chamber. And for the first time that morning, Marianne wondered whether they had truly entered a place of discovery or a place that had been waiting. They stood together in the dim light, each person silent, listening not only with their ears but with their skin. The cave had a sound that wasn't quite sound at all, a low, humming breath that came and went in rhythm with their own. It was not wind. No breeze stirred in this sealed hollow. It was as if the very rock was breathing, slow and ancient. Marianne steadied her lantern on the floor and let its amber glow spread gently outward. The light rippled over the painted walls, illuminating the strange collection of images. There were animals, deer with wide antlers, serpents twisting in spirals, a great bear with blackened eyes. Between them danced the figures of people, small and thin, their hands raised toward something unseen. She knelt to inspect one of them more closely. The pigment was remarkably preserved, iron oxide mixed with what smelled faintly of burned bone and resin. But when her fingertips hovered just above the image, she hesitated. The air there felt warm. Behind her, Leon, the geologist, was setting up instruments. "Temperature's rising the deeper we go," she murmured. "Strange for this kind of cave. Should be colder." Marianne said nothing. She was watching the reflection of the lantern flame in the stone. It trembled just slightly, though the air was still. "Maybe it's geothermal," said Eric, their technician, his voice a whisper, swallowed by echoes. "Or maybe there's a lower chamber venting air upward." But none of them moved to find out. Instead, their lights swept wider, revealing more of the chamber's span. At the far end, a great column of stone rose from floor to ceiling, split like a massive pillar. Along its surface were marks that didn't match the ancient style, thin grooves, almost like fingers, dragged through clay. Marianne approached slowly. Each step was cushioned by a layer of dust that muffled her boots. The smell of minerals grew stronger, iron, damp limestone, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. She shivered, but pressed closer, drawn by a feeling she couldn't name. When her lamp touched the pillar, it gleamed faintly. The surface wasn't entirely solid. Beneath the crusted outer layer, she could see a depth, like translucent stone shot through with amber veins. Then, very softly, she heard it. A murmur. A voice that was not quite a voice, coming from somewhere inside the pillar. It was so faint, she thought it was her mind inventing it. a trick of nerves and fatigue. But then Liane called from across the chamber. "Did you hear that?" Marianne turned. "What?" "Like someone speaking." Eric turned up his lamp, scanning the walls. The painted figures flickered again in the new light, their edges blurring and blending, as though the pigment itself was sighing in its sleep. For a moment, the bear's head seemed to tilt. The deer lifted its hooves. The hands on the wall reached. And then, as suddenly as it began, the stillness returned. Only the drip of unseen water filled the silence, falling at long intervals, like a slow heartbeat echoing through the stone. Marianne forced herself to breathe. "Let's document the markings," she said quietly. "We'll make sense of it in the morning." But as she spoke, her eyes drifted once more to the pillar, and she could have sworn that the faintest shimmer ran beneath its surface, like something stirring far beneath ice. By the time they set up their small camp within the outer chamber, the lantern light had softened into a golden haze. Dust motes floated lazily through the air, catching the glow like drifting stars. Beyond the circle of warmth, the darkness thickened, alive and heavy, like velvet drawn over a sleeping world. Marianne sat cross-legged beside her equipment, recording quiet notes into a small leather-bound journal. Her handwriting was steady, but her thoughts were not. The images on the walls still haunted the edges of her mind. The painted eyes seemed to follow her, even when she wasn't looking. Liane was sorting samples, her movements careful and slow. "I don't like the acoustics," she murmured after a while. "When I drop a tool, the echo comes back wrong, like there's another chamber close behind the wall but not quite touching it." Eric gave a dry chuckle. "Maybe it's just the cave talking back. Happens in big caverns. They have their own voices." But even as he spoke, the faint hum returned, a low tremor running through the floor beneath them, not loud, but deep, like the world shifting in its sleep. Their water bottles quivered against the stone, and the fine dust at their feet shivered in patterns that rippled outward in concentric rings. Marianne looked up sharply. "Did you feel that?" Jonas, their youngest member and assistant, nodded. "It's not seismic. I checked the instruments. No readings." The hum faded again, leaving only the whisper of their breath. And then, from the far wall, came a sound that was unmistakably human, a slow, dragging scrape, like something being drawn across stone. They all froze. Eric swung his lamp toward the sound, and the beams swept over the painted figures, the deer, the hunters, the spirals, and for one suspended heartbeat, the art seemed to shimmer again. The hands on the wall, those ancient stenciled imprints, looked newer now, fresher. Liane whispered, "They weren't that bright before, were they?" No one answered. Marianne rose, her knees unsteady. The scraping had stopped, but the sense of presence remained, something unseen, pressing gently against the air. She stepped closer to the wall, raising her lamp. The light revealed a patch of pigment that hadn't been there before. The shape was rough, still wet, the color deep red like rust or blood. It formed a new hand, slightly smaller than the others, its edges glistening faintly. Her throat went dry. "Who touched this wall?" she asked softly, though she already knew no one had. The paint's scent was sharp and raw, filling the air with iron. Jonas shook his head, stepping back. It just appeared. Marianne reached toward it, stopping just before her fingers met the surface. The wall was warm again, warmer than before. The faint vibration beneath her palm made her skin prickle. And then she heard it, a whisper, faint and close, as though spoken into her ear. A single word carried on the slow breath of the cave. Remember. She stumbled back, her lantern clattering against the stone. The sound echoed endlessly, twisting through the chamber until it faded into silence once more. No one moved. The paintings on the wall were still again, but something had changed in the air, an awareness that hadn't been there before. The cave, Marianne realized, was no longer just watching them. It was listening. Sleep came slowly that night, if at all. Their camp, tucked within the wide chamber of painted walls, flickered with the soft orange of their lanterns. Each flame wavered, as though uncertain of its place in the dark, and every sound, a breath, a rustle, a sigh, carried far beyond its source, blending with the low heartbeat of the cave. Marianne lay wrapped in her sleeping bag, her notebook open beside her. The word remember circled her thoughts like a moth trapped in lamplight. It was absurd, she told herself. The cave couldn't speak. There must be an explanation, a vibration in the rock, an echo, a trick of sound waves. Yet deep down, a colder part of her mind whispered otherwise. Jonas was already asleep, or trying to be. She could hear him murmuring softly, a half-dreamed conversation. Leanne, by the instruments, was awake too, scribbling notes by flashlight. Eric was the only one still moving, checking the gear near the entrance, his shoulders tense, his silhouette outlined in dim gold. The air was different now, heavier. With every breath, Marianne could taste the minerals, metallic, almost sweet, like old rainwater drawn from the heart of a mountain. The scent of the place pressed close, settling into her skin. She closed her eyes. For a while there was only darkness and the slow thud of her pulse. Then somewhere in that drifting half-sleep she felt the earth exhale. It began as a deep sigh rising from the floor beneath her, a warm, slow gust that passed through the chamber, stirring the lanterns. Dust lifted in graceful spirals, swirling upward before dissolving again into the dark. And with that breath came sound, faint, wordless, almost musical. It wasn't singing, not quite. It was older than that, like a hum made by something vast and unseen. It wove through the walls low and resonant, and as it passed, the painted figures seemed to shift in its rhythm. The deer's legs bent, the bear's muzzle tilted toward the unseen source, and the human shapes raised their hands higher, as if in greeting or surrender. Marianne sat upright, heart racing. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Leanne looked up, her eyes wide, her pen stilled. "It's everywhere." Eric turned slowly, the light from his lamp trembling. "It's the cave. It's moving air. It has to be." But none of them truly believed it. The hum deepened, vibrating through the stone until it touched their bones. The lantern flames bent, leaning toward the far wall where the pillar stood, the great split column of amber and stone. The light within it pulsed faintly, like the glow of a living thing. Jonas stirred awake, his voice groggy. "What's happening?" The The sound eased then, fading as gently as it had come. The lanterns stilled, the warmth sank away, and silence folded back around them like a blanket. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Leon exhaled softly, almost a prayer. "It's breathing," she said. "The cave is breathing." Marianne looked toward the pillar, and for an instant she saw something stir beneath its translucent surface, a suggestion of motion, too fluid for stone, too steady for imagination. And she realized with a quiet ache of wonder and dread that what they had thought was ancient art might not have been memory at all. It might have been warning. By morning, the air inside the cave felt heavier, as if the night had thickened it. Their lamps had long burned low, leaving the space washed in the faint grey of filtered daylight that managed to reach through the narrow entrance. Even that meagre light struggled to touch the painted walls, where colours seemed deeper now, darker, more alive. Marianne rose quietly, stretching the stiffness from her limbs. Her breath came out in small clouds, though the air no longer felt cold. It was warm in a strange, shifting way, warm like something breathing against the back of her neck. Eric was already awake, fussing over his camera equipment. His voice was hushed, cautious. "I checked the footage from last night," he said, eyes flicking between screens. "There's movement on the walls, small but definite. It's not the light, it's the paint itself." Leon joined them, rubbing her eyes. "What do you mean, movement?" He turned the screen toward her. Grainy footage, captured in the flicker of lantern light, showed the painted deer, its legs shifting, the angle of its body bending ever so slightly between frames. The hunter's spears had changed position. One of the hands, once pressed against the stone, now floated just above it. Marianne's mouth went dry. Could it be moisture? Expansion in the mineral layer? "Maybe," Eric said, though the word had no conviction. "But look closer." He zoomed in on a section near the pillar. The image wavered slightly, showing the faint suggestion of new shapes forming within the rock. Faces. Pale, elongated, their features half-finished, as though painted by invisible hands in the dark. Jonas, who had been silent until now, murmured, "It's like the cave is remembering more of itself." That word again, remember. Marianne turned toward the pillar. Its surface was no longer translucent amber. It was glowing faintly like the ember of a dying fire. She walked closer, each step echoing softly. Inside the stone, shadows moved, slow, curling shapes like smoke caught within glass. And beneath her fingertips, the surface was no longer rough. It pulsed. She stumbled back, breath quickening. "There's something inside it." The hum returned, low, resonant, and steady. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. The painted figures rippled again, as if stirred by invisible hands. The hunters turned their faces toward her. The bear opened its mouth in a silent roar. And then movement. A section of wall near the far side shuddered. The sound was deep and wet, like clay breaking apart. The painted spiral there twisted, unfurling across the stone as though it were alive. Colors ran together, red and black and ochre flowing like blood through cracks in the rock. Leanne gasped. "It's melting." But Marianne knew better. It wasn't melting, it was emerging. Shapes pushed through the surface, faintly raised, the texture of skin beneath paint. A hand appeared first, not drawn but real, pressing outward from within the wall. The fingers trembled, slick with a sheen of mineral water. Then it retreated again, leaving only the echo of touch behind. Silence followed, long, unbearable silence. Jonas whispered, "It knows we're here." Marianne looked once more at the pillar, whose inner light now throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The painted walls had begun to move, not in illusion, but in truth. And somewhere deep within the stone, something vast was waking. The following hours passed in a haze of disbelief. The team barely spoke, each of them caught between scientific instinct and the quiet, creeping sense that they had crossed into something far older than understanding. The cave no longer felt like a chamber of discovery. It felt like a mind. Marianne set up her recorder, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound calm. "Day 2, she began softly. "Subterranean chamber, painted figures appear to exhibit kinetic distortion. Possible causes, mineral subsidence, thermal expansion, light interference." Her words faded. The recorder hummed quietly in her hand. She could hear her own heartbeat pulsing through the stillness. When she looked up, the walls were shifting again. Not violently, not like an earthquake, more like breathing. The rock flexed and relaxed in slow rhythm, so subtle she almost doubted her sight. The painted figures swayed with it, the way reeds move under shallow water. Leanne was kneeling beside one of the murals, her gloved fingers tracing the air just above it. "It's not the pigment," she murmured. "The pigment's just riding the motion. It's the stone itself that's alive." Eric gave a low laugh, thin, forced. "Stones don't live, Leanne." But no one corrected her. The hum beneath their feet grew more distinct now, a deep, resonant vibration that made their equipment rattle softly. It wasn't random. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern that felt intentional, almost like speech slowed down beyond human hearing. Marianne turned toward the pillar again. The amber light within it glowed stronger, illuminating the chamber with a warm pulse that flickered gently against their faces. She felt drawn to it, compelled by something she couldn't name. As she approached, she realized that the glow wasn't only light, it was memory. Images moved faintly beneath the translucent surface, shapes of people, animals, fire, rain. They passed across one another in waves as though she were looking through time itself. And then, voices. Soft, layered whispers in dozens of tones, overlapping but distinct. Not English, not any known tongue. Yet their cadence was gentle, rhythmic, carrying something like sorrow or warning. Marianne reached out her hand, fingers trembling, and touched the pillar. The warmth spread instantly up her arm, gentle at first, then deep, like heat pouring through her blood. In her mind, she saw flashes, hands dipping into red clay, torches flickering in darkness, the rhythmic press of palms against the walls. The people, ancient and silent, painting their lives into stone, believing it would hold their stories forever. And then the tremor, the fall, the earth swallowing their voices whole. The cave, she realized, wasn't simply painted. It was imprinted with their lives, their fears, their last breaths. The pigment wasn't merely color, it was blood, ground and mixed into clay, sealing memory into the rock itself. She staggered back, gasping softly. Lian caught her. "What did you see?" Marianne shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "They didn't die here. They became it. The cave, it remembers them." From somewhere behind them, Jonas let out a trembling laugh that broke into a sob. "Then what happens when it remembers too much?" The hum deepened. The air shivered. The painted hands on the walls, hundreds of them, began to glow faintly red, one by one, until the chamber was alive with ghostly light. The walls were remembering, and they had not yet finished. By the time their lamps were burning low again, the entire chamber seemed to pulse in rhythm with something deep and unseen. The hum had become constant now, a low, tender vibration that trembled through the soles of their boots, through the bones of their wrists, through the air itself. It was not menacing, but alive. The painted walls no longer looked still. In the lantern light, the shapes undulated like slow waves beneath the surface of a lake. Figures once flat were gaining depth, soft reliefs blooming where there had been only pigment. The ochre hands that glowed on the walls looked less like art and more like imprints freshly pressed there, the edges soft, as if the stone were still pliant. Marianne could feel the air shift with every heartbeat. Her thoughts felt strange, slower, dreamlike, as though the cave itself were pulling her inward, easing her into its rhythm. Lian spoke first, her voice hushed. "It's almost soothing, isn't it?" Eric looked up sharply. "Soothing?" His eyes were hollow in the lamplight. "It's rewriting itself before our eyes." But Marianne understood what Lian meant. Despite the strangeness, the impossible breathing walls, the warmth of the stone, there was a calmness to it. Not danger, not yet. A feeling of being remembered rather than threatened. She sat down slowly, cross-legged on the ground, her palms pressed flat to the stone. The warmth seeped through her gloves. The hum resonated up her spine. "It's like a pulse," she whispered, "like the earth's own heartbeat." Jonas, sitting nearby, tilted his head as if listening to a melody only he could hear. "It's speaking again," he said softly. "Listen." The hum shifted. It was subtle at first, barely a modulation, but as they sat in stillness, the sound began to form patterns, rising and falling, looping back upon itself. The vibrations turned into tones, tones into murmurs. Marianne realized with a jolt that the pattern mirrored something she had seen etched into the pillar earlier, an ancient spiral of lines and curves. It wasn't just decoration, it was notation, a record of sound. She took out her recorder, pressing it to the floor. The small light blinked red as it captured the resonance. "This isn't random," she murmured. "It's structured." Lian, eyes half closed, was tracing one of the glowing handprints with her fingertips, just short of touching it.
"They're singing," she said, her voice drifting. "The people who made this place, they're still here." Eric's jaw tightened. "You mean buried here?" But as soon as he said it, a faint gust moved through the chamber, warm and deliberate, like a sigh of disapproval. The lanterns wavered. The hum grew softer, almost tender, like a mother soothing a child. Marianne felt the weight of something immense and sorrowful filling the air around them. "No," she whispered. "Not buried. Preserved." The walls shimmered once more.
In the motion of paint and shadow, she thought she saw them, the first painters, their faces calm and serene, their hands raised not in worship, but in farewell. And for a fleeting moment, she felt peace. Until Jonas gasped. He was staring at the wall opposite the pillar, his light trembling in his hand. There, newly emerged from the rock, was a handprint larger than the others, deeper, darker, as though pressed by something that did not belong to the ancient past at all. The paint was still wet. The discovery froze them where they stood. That new handprint glistened in the lantern light, a vivid shade of red that seemed to pulse with its own faint warmth. Its edges were not dry pigment. They shone wetly, as if freshly pressed only moments ago. Yet none of them had touched the wall. Marianne approached first, drawn by both fear and awe. The air near the mark was dense, humming faintly against her skin. The outline was broader than any human hand she'd ever seen. Long fingers, narrow palm, and nails that left slight indentations in the soft stone. "Eric," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Check your footage. Was this here before dawn?" He flipped through the video files, fast-forwarding through the night's still frames. The footage showed the painted wall, unmoving. Then, sometime just before sunrise, the lantern light flickered, and where the empty wall had been, the red print appeared. Instantly, without anyone near it. Jonas whispered, "It's responding to us." Leanne shook her head. Responding? Or mimicking? Marianne stared at the mark again. The print seemed familiar. She held up her own gloved hand beside it and drew in a quiet breath. The shape was almost the same, except slightly stretched, distorted, as though the stone had remembered her movement wrong, like a reflection in rippling water. "It's mine," she said softly. "Or something trying to make it." The hum in the floor deepened. The paintings all around them seemed to lean inward, the shadows thickening along their edges. The light of their lamps pressed back against an invisible tide, flickering as though smothered by unseen breath. "Everyone stay calm," Marianne said, though her voice quavered. "Whatever this is, it's reactive to motion, sound, or maybe—" Her words cut short. The handprint darkened suddenly, bleeding downward in long rivulets of crimson dust. The streaks formed lines across the floor, curling together into circular patterns that pulsed faintly with light. The shapes matched the spirals on the pillar, those same swirling marks that had shifted the night before. Leanne stumbled backward.
"It's forming symbols!" The air grew warmer again, the heat rising from beneath them in rhythmic waves.
The hum now had a voice, still wordless, but insistent, layered with the sound of distant breath and slow heartbeats. Marianne's eyes darted to the pillar. The amber glow had intensified, bright enough now to reveal motion within, vague silhouettes shifting behind the translucent surface, hands, faces, and animal forms all moving in slow, graceful arcs as if dancing underwater. Jonas clutched his head. "It's too loud!" he cried, though to Marianne the sound was not loud at all. It was simply everywhere, inside her chest, behind her eyes, pulsing through her blood. Then, just as suddenly it stopped. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The walls were still again. The air cooled. Their lamps steadied. But the new handprint remained, darker now, set deep into the rock as though carved there. and below it, where the dripping pigment had formed its strange spiral, faint words had emerged, ancient and fractured, but recognizable to the human ear. "We remember you." They stood in a circle, silent, staring at the words that had appeared beneath the crimson handprint. "We remember you." The phrase shimmered faintly in the dim light, the letters rippling as if carved into a surface made of water rather than stone. Each letter seemed alive, breathing, flexing, softening at the edges before returning to stillness again. Leanne crouched first, her face pale. "That's not possible," she whispered. "There's no tool work here. It's forming itself." Eric swallowed hard. "Or someone or something is forming it for us." The quiet between their voices was thick and heavy. The air no longer smelled of iron alone. There was a new scent now, faint and sweet, like old rain on clay, and something almost organic, something living. Marianne knelt beside the words, her gloved fingers trembling just above their surface. The stone beneath them felt warm, like the skin of something sleeping. "We remember you," she repeated softly. "What does that mean?" Jonas was pacing near the wall of painted figures, his flashlight cutting through the dim.
"Maybe it's literal. Maybe it remembers everything, every sound, every movement, the pigment, the air, the touch of hands. It's all a kind of recording." Marianne looked up. "A living archive." He nodded, eyes bright with a feverish awe. "Exactly. The people who made this place, they found a way to imprint themselves into the rock. Not just their art, but their memories. That's what you saw when you touched the pillar." Leanne shook her head. "Then why now? Why is it reacting only when we're here?" The pillar pulsed faintly in answer, as if listening.
Marianne rose to her feet and took a slow breath. "Because we woke it." Her voice echoed softly through the cavern, carrying far longer than it should have, each word overlapping itself, as though spoken by more than one mouth. The hum returned, gentle this time, like the breath of a tide rolling in and out. The painted walls began to glow again, not all at once, but in sections, each one lighting like a lantern. First the hunters, then the animals, then the spirals and handprints. Each seemed to hum with its own note, distinct but harmonious. A pattern was forming in the sound, a melody woven from dozens of pitches, low and resonant, vibrating through the air. Leanne's scientific calm began to melt into wonder. "It's communication," she whispered, "a kind of harmonic resonance language, the stones responding to frequencies, maybe even emotion." Eric's lamp flickered as he turned in slow circles, filming everything. "It's responding to us." Marianne listened carefully. Beneath the hum there was rhythm, slow, rising, almost like words being shaped through tone alone. Then, for a single moment, the melody aligned, notes harmonizing in perfect balance, and she heard it clearly. "You came back." The air quivered, warm and close. The light dimmed once more. No one moved. Marianne's throat tightened. "They think we're them," she whispered. "They're echoes." Jonas took a step closer to the wall, transfixed by the glowing handprints. "Then maybe that's why it feels like home," he said softly. "Because part of us has been here before." And as he said it, the painted hands began to move, rising one by one from the stone, reaching outward through the dim air, as though welcoming what they believed had finally returned. At first it was gentle. The movement of the painted hands was slow, graceful even, like a ripple through still water. One after another they seemed to breathe themselves into being, lifting away from the stone as if released from centuries of slumber. The air shimmered faintly around them, and the smell of earth grew rich, full, alive. Jonas stood motionless, his face bathed in the faint red glow. "There, greeting us," he whispered. His voice trembled with wonder, not fear. Marianne couldn't speak. Her light caught the fine detail of each shape, fingers blurred at the edges, pigment trembling as if made of dust and breath together. They hovered just above the wall, not quite solid, not entirely illusion. The nearest hand drifted closer. Its surface was rough with colour and grit, yet soft where the pigment thinned to air. Marianne felt warmth radiate from it, gentle, almost maternal. She could smell the faintest trace of smoke and resin, the sense of ancient fires long gone. Leon's whisper came from behind her. "They're showing trust." But Eric shook his head. "No," he murmured. "They're testing us." As if responding, the floating hand stilled. Then slowly, they turned, palms upward, open, waiting. Marianne's instinct told her to reach back, to mirror the gesture. She hesitated, her breath shallow. In the hush, the cave's heartbeat pulsed once, deep and low. Then she lifted her hand and placed her palm against one of theirs. The contact wasn't physical. It was like touching warm light, a sensation of being seen, remembered, measured. Images bloomed behind her eyes, firelit gatherings, paint ground between stones, laughter echoing through the cavern before the world outside froze and fell silent. Her heart slowed, sinking with the pulse beneath the rock. She wasn't afraid anymore, only aware. Then something changed. The warmth deepened, spreading from her palm to her chest, her throat, her mind. The images turned darker. Storm clouds, falling ash, screams swallowed by the earth. She saw the people who painted these walls fleeing into the cave as the world above cracked apart. They pressed their hands against the rock, not in greeting, but in plea. And in their last moments, as the ground sealed them inside, they whispered to the stone, begging it to hold their lives, their faces, their memories, to keep them safe until the world remembered them again. The hum rose sharply. The hand in front of her glowed bright, its warmth turning to heat. Marianne pulled away with a cry, stumbling backward. Her palm was streaked with red dust that pulsed faintly before fading into her skin. The hands froze once more, their glow dimming. The air went still. Leon rushed to her side. "Marianne, what happened?" She shook her head, still trembling. "They showed me everything. They didn't die here. They became this place to survive it." Eric's eyes darted toward the pillar. Its light was stronger now, amber, bleeding into gold. Shadows inside moved faster, pressing against the translucent surface. "Survive what?" he asked quietly. Marianne turned toward the wall, where one last hand still hovered, motionless. The faint echo of a voice answered, so low it barely rose above the breath of the cave. The dark that ate the sky. And for a long, breathless moment, none of them dared to move. The words hung in the air, heavier than stone, vibrating in the silence. The dark that ate the sky. Marianne whispered them aloud, tasting each syllable as if it were a spell. The cave responded immediately. A shiver ran through the walls. The painted figures quivered, their edges softening and stretching. Shadows deepened behind the images, dark pools where light refused to linger. The air grew thick, carrying the faint, acrid scent of smoke and wet earth. It was as if the cave were breathing in fear and history alike. Leanne pressed her palms to the floor, her fingers trembling. They survived. Something catastrophic, she said quietly. Something that fell from above, that changed the sky itself. Marianne's gaze travelled over the pillar. Inside, the amber light pulsed faster, revealing the silhouettes of people fleeing, their hands pressed to stone, eyes wide, faces etched with despair and urgency. She could feel the panic in their motion, even though the images were still trapped behind the translucent surface. Eric swallowed hard. Do you think the darkness is still in here? Jonas stepped closer to the wall, eyes scanning the shifting hands. No, he whispered. I think it's in them. The cave survived it, and it's showing us their memory. Marianne nodded slowly.
It's a record, a warning. They imprinted everything, their fears, their losses, their survival, into the walls, into the stone, into the air itself. A gust of warm wind swept through the chamber suddenly, carrying the sound of movement. The ceiling dripped faintly as water traced rivulets along the stone, yet the echo that followed was not water alone. It was the sound of whispered names, soft and overlapping, stretching across the cavern. The glowing hands shifted again. One drifted toward Marianne, palm facing her.
She lifted her own hand slowly, and when their fingertips met, not quite physically, but through the shared pulse of warmth, another vision unfurled. She saw a sky darkened by ash, a world blurred in grey and red. Fires burned in the distance, and figures moved desperately through a landscape breaking apart. People pressed themselves into the cave's entrance, clutching children, animals, artifacts, anything they could carry into the stone's memory. And then the collapse. The smoke, the roar of falling rock, the suffocating shadow that swallowed everything above. The vision faded, leaving only the warmth in her palm and the slow pulse of the cave. It's more than a memory, Marianne said quietly, her voice steady but low. It's a living warning. The cave has carried their experience forward, through centuries, through decay, until it found us. Eric swallowed again, his usual skepticism gone. So, we're seeing the past, experiencing it, through them. The hands all around the chamber began to rise slowly in unison, a gentle tide of warm, red light. They lifted, drifted, and circled, forming an invisible sphere around the team. The motion was deliberate, protective, not threatening. Marianne inhaled deeply. They're asking us to witness it, she said, to remember so the darkness doesn't return unseen. For a long while, the team stood together, enveloped in the moving light and warmth. The cave's breath pulsed around them, slow, deliberate, and soothing. They could feel the weight of history, but it was tempered with hope. The hope of preservation, of memory, of survival carried forward. And somewhere, deep in the amber glow of the pillar, The silhouettes moved in quiet acknowledgement. The walls had remembered, and now they had us. The cave seemed to settle around them, as if the pulse of the hands had pressed a gentle rhythm into the very air. Warmth radiated from the walls and the pillar, coiling around their shoulders and down their spines. Marianne could feel it in her chest, a slow, soothing heartbeat that matched her own. The floating hands had formed a circle around them, palms up, fingertips wavering in the faint glow. Each one radiated light and warmth, yet the sensation was gentle, not intrusive. Marianne lifted her hand again, hesitating only a moment before placing it against a drifting hand nearest her. The pulse that travelled through her arm was immediate, soft, steady, a rhythm older than any heartbeat she had ever known. Around her, the chamber seemed to breathe in unison. The painted figures on the walls shimmered and shifted in gentle waves. The hunters paused mid-step, the animals frozen in elegant stances that swayed as though underwater. Spirals and handprints glimmered, vibrating faintly in resonance with the cave's hum. Liane leaned close to Marianne, her voice a mere whisper. "It's guiding us." Marianne nodded slowly, staring at the hand beneath her palm. A memory unfolded, vivid yet dreamlike. She saw the first people entering the cave long ago, carrying torches and food, pressing themselves into the walls with hands smeared in pigment. They worked methodically, transferring their lives onto the stone, not as decoration, but as a message, a preservation of existence. The cave was alive with their intention. Jonas let out a quiet breath, mesmerized. "It's teaching us." Marianne realized he was right. Each rising hand, each gentle ripple along the walls, was part of a lesson encoded into stone and pigment. The cave remembered the past, yes, but it also remembered how to guide the present. Eric, camera in hand, tried to capture the moment, but every frame he viewed seemed to shift subtly, the hands no longer solid in the lens, the shadows of figures bending in impossible ways. "It's changing depending on how we see it," he said, voice low. Marianne looked around. The chamber itself felt larger now, as if expanding outward with the motion of memory. Dust swirled lazily in the light, tiny motes catching and refracting, faint glows from the hands and the pillar. Every detail, the ridges of stone, the layers of pigment, the echo of dripping water felt intensified, deliberate, like the cave was inviting them to see more, to feel more. The amber pillar pulsed steadily, and inside, the silhouettes moved with slow grace. The figures of long-dead painters pressed their hands to the stone once again, guiding shapes into spirals, directing the flow of color, instructing unseen hands. Marianne realized that each of the glowing hands surrounding them was a continuation of that teaching, a tactile bridge between the living and the remembered. She closed her eyes and let the warmth sink into her. She could feel it through her fingertips, through the soles of her boots, through her entire being. A gentle lesson whispered through the pulse. Survival was memory. Memory was connection. Connection was continuity. And then, faint but unmistakable, a new sound emerged from the cave. The softest, sweetest murmur of a voice, almost like singing threading through the hum. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone was unmistakable. Comfort, reassurance, acceptance. Marianne opened her eyes to see the hands undulating gently, moving in rhythm with the melody. The chamber seemed to fold in upon itself, softening edges, bathing them in light. The cave was no longer just alive, it was awake, aware, and welcoming them as part of its circle. A shiver ran through the team, not fear but awe. And for the first time, Marianne felt the overwhelming truth of what they were experiencing. They were not merely observers here. They were participants. Witnesses chosen by the memory of those who had once pressed pigment into stone, by the stone itself, by the living cave. The hands pulsed once, slowly, deliberately, and then withdrew slightly, allowing them to step forward into the center of the circle, bathed in warmth, surrounded by echoes of ancient lives, suspended in the delicate balance between history and now. Marianne whispered softly, almost to herself, "We are remembered." And for a moment, the hum softened to a quiet, lullaby-like rhythm, guiding them deeper into understanding, into connection, into the cave's gentle embrace. Marianne felt drawn to the pillar, the heart of the cavern, its amber glow, steady yet alive, pulsing with a warmth that seemed to seep into her very bones. The circle of hands around them wavered slightly as if acknowledging her movement, parting just enough to allow her to approach without interruption. The closer she stepped, the more the pillar seemed to hum in resonance with her own pulse. The warmth radiating from it wrapped around her like a soft, familiar cloak, and the subtle vibration under her feet seemed to echo her heartbeat back to her. Each breath she took was drawn deeper, as if the air itself wanted to be inhaled, wanted her to remember what it carried. Inside the translucent amber, the silhouettes moved with more precision now. Faces, hands, and torsos shifted in delicate, synchronized motion. It was not chaotic. It was choreography, a language of gesture and memory. She saw the figures of the first painters, their hands pressed to stone, working with care, repetition, and reverence. Each movement traced patterns that matched the floating spirals and glowing handprints around them. Leon's voice came softly from behind. "They're teaching you, all of us. It's showing the motions, the actions like a ritual of remembrance." Marianne nodded, reaching out to place both hands on the pillar. The warmth surged, gentle yet insistent, filling her arms and chest. And then images unfolded before her mind's eye, the original creators pressing their palms to the walls, painting figures of animals, hunters, and spirals, breathing their very lives into pigment. She felt the motions as if her own hands were moving through the air, reproducing the ritual, the rhythm, the care of hands long gone. Jonas, watching quietly, whispered, It's alive. It wants us to know them, to feel them, to continue their work in our own way." Marianne felt a flicker of understanding, profound and gentle. The cave was more than memory, it was intention. The artists had not merely preserved themselves, they had set a task for anyone who might come after. The cave remembered, and it sought remembrance in return. The pillar pulsed again, stronger this time. The silhouettes of figures moved in harmony with the floating hands surrounding them. The humans in amber extended their hands toward the surface, and Marianne felt the invisible connection thread through the air, linking her to the ancient presence, to the cave itself. She closed her eyes and let herself sway slightly, mimicking the rhythm the figures suggested. The hands around her mirrored the motion, gentle ripples echoing the sway of her body. She was a part of the cave's memory now, and it was a part of hers. Eric's voice broke softly from the edge of the circle. We're communicating. Not with words, but with motion, with presence. Marianne opened her eyes, and the pillar's glow flared softly in acknowledgement, spreading warmth across the chamber. The floating hands rose and rotated, the painted figures on the walls trembling and breathing in the synchronized pulse. The entire cavern seemed to resonate, every sound, every vibration, every color merging into one harmonious whole. For the first time, Marianne felt a complete understanding, a sense of belonging in a place that had waited centuries for witnesses. The cave was alive, not threatening, not malevolent. It was patient. It had kept its memories, its lessons, and its creators safe, waiting for those who would honor them. And now the pillar pulsed with a gentle insistence, a heartbeat stronger than before, urging her and the team to step fully into the center of the chamber, into the shared rhythm of remembrance, into the embrace of a living history. Marianne stepped fully into the center of the circle, feeling the warmth of the pillar on one side and the gentle pulse of the floating hands around her. Each hand's subtle movement seemed to brush against the edges of her awareness, guiding her attention, coaxing her senses open. The cave's breath filled her lungs, carrying not only air, but the weight of centuries and the quiet song of survival embedded into stone. The shadows on the walls began to shift again, more deliberately this time. The painted figures moved as if performing a slow dance, their motions fluid, almost hypnotic. The hunters' spears traced arcs through the amber glow of the cavern. The deer leapt in gentle, endless loops. The spirals turned, unfurling and curling back in perfect rhythm. Each movement cast new shadows, creating layers of light and darkness that rippled across the walls like water. Leanne murmured, "They're showing us something, a pattern. Look at how the shadows fall, how the figures interact with the hands and the pillar." Marianne nodded, her eyes tracing the interplay of light and shadow. It was not merely art, it was a map of action, of visual language. Every shift of pigment, every flutter of the floating hands conveyed meaning. The cave was teaching, demonstrating, showing how to navigate memory, how to honor it, how to exist within it without disturbing it. Jonas stepped closer, awestruck. It's like a ritual, but in slow motion, like they're moving through time for us to see, to feel. The pillar pulsed in response, amber light spreading like molten gold across the chamber. Within it, the silhouettes of the first painters moved in harmony with the hands and the painted figures. Their gestures were deliberate, almost meditative, and Marianne felt herself instinctively mirroring them. She lifted her arms slowly, traced the arc of her palms through the air, and felt the cave respond. Hands around her mirrored her motions, shadows shifted in perfect alignment, the hum of the chamber deepened into a resonant chord. Eric whispered from the edge of the circle, voice reverent, "It's teaching us to move with it, to understand the rhythm of its memory." The realization settled over them. The cave was not only alive, it was aware. It had preserved its creators not as relics, but as guides. The pillars, the murals, the floating hands, they were all instruments for teaching presence, patience, and care. Every motion, every pulse of light, every whisper of warmth carried instruction. Marianne felt her heartbeat sync with the cave's pulse. She could feel the weight of history, the caution of survival, the gentle insistence of remembrance coursing through her. She moved slowly, deliberately, following the rhythm of the hands and shadows, letting the cave guide her body, her mind, her attention. In the glow of the amber pillar, surrounded by rising hands and shifting murals, the chamber seemed to breathe with her. Light and shadow intertwined, forming a living tapestry of memory and motion, a delicate balance of struggle and hope, of life preserved through care. And as the cave's pulse deepened, Marianne understood. This was more than observation. This was communion. The living walls, the glowing pillar, the floating hands, they were offering them, a way to step into the flow of time itself, to become participants in a story that had begun long before they arrived. The chamber settled into a rhythm, slow and unbroken. Marianne moved with the hands and shadows, her body tracing the arcs and spirals that had been etched and painted into the stone so many centuries ago. With each gesture, the warmth from the pillar seeped deeper into her, connecting her pulse to the hum beneath her feet, the soft vibration of the walls, and the subtle sway of the floating hands. Jonas had stopped pacing and now mirrored her movements cautiously, lifting and lowering his arms, following the patterns of the ancient figures. Leon's eyes were closed, her hands hovering just above the surface of a painted spiral, feeling the vibrations of memory pulse through her fingertips. Even Eric, who had always kept his distance, had lowered his camera, captivated by the delicate choreography of stone and light. Marianne could feel the weight of time pressing gently upon them. The cave had lived through centuries, through storms, through the dark that had eaten the sky. It had absorbed the lives and fears of the people who had pressed pigment into stone, and now, in a slow, deliberate pulse, it was revealing the rhythm of survival itself. The shadows shifted again, elongating and curling across the walls, tracing paths that Marianne recognized from the pillars' spirals and the rising hands. Each path was like a heartbeat, a memory pressed into space, a record of motion meant to guide those who came after. She reached out and touched one of the spirals with her gloved fingers. The pigment was warm, pliant as if it had been pressed yesterday rather than centuries ago. The spiral seemed to pulse beneath her hand, and she felt the echo of every motion that had created it, the careful hands of those long gone, the weight of their breath, the rhythm of their heartbeat. The cave, it's teaching us the flow of time, she whispered. It's showing how moments stretch, how actions ripple through history. It's alive because it carries memory, because it has learned to move with the past. Leanne nodded softly. And it wants us to learn, to move with it, not against it, to honor the balance of creation and survival. Marianne's eyes drifted to the pillar. Inside, the silhouettes of the first painters moved in perfect harmony, repeating gestures that echoed through the entire chamber. They reached for one another, pressed pigment into the stone, then lifted their hands in silent acknowledgement. Marianne realized the cave was giving them a lesson in continuity, that life, memory, and care were all connected, flowing one into another, never ending. She took a slow, deep breath, letting the warmth, the pulse, the light, and the motion fill her completely. She felt centuries of lives pressed into the stone, flowing outward into the present, brushing against her mind and body. Each hand that hovered around her, each shadow that twisted across the walls, was part of the same pulse, part of the same lesson. Jonas murmured, "It's beautiful. The darkness couldn't erase them because they left this flow of life." Marianne nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes. Yes, they survived, not by escaping the dark, but by preserving themselves through care, memory, and movement. And now, they are letting us continue it. The cave breathed with them, the walls quivering slightly, the hands rising and falling, the pillar pulsing steadily. The rhythm of centuries intertwined with the present, the ancient voices harmonizing with their own. For a moment, time itself seemed suspended, flowing slowly like a river of amber light, shadows, and warm breath, a river into which they were now fully immersed. Marianne stepped closer to one of the spirals etched into the wall, tracing its curve with her gloved finger. The warm pulse beneath her touch rippled outward, and she felt it not only through her hand, but through the soles of her boots, up her spine, and into the center of her chest. The cave was speaking in its own language, and each line of the spiral carried meaning. The floating hands rose higher now, circling gently above the floor, as if following her gaze. Each hand pulsed with a soft red glow, their movement synchronized with the rhythm of the spiral on the wall. Marianne felt a strange, tender compulsion to follow the path, to move with it rather than simply observing it. She lifted her arms, tracing the arc of the spiral in the air, and immediately felt a gentle warmth echo her motion. Jonas mimicked her, hesitating at first, then slowly moving in sync. Lian, still kneeling near another spiral, reached out her fingertips, and the pigment seemed to respond, brightening slightly, shimmering in place. Even Eric, camera in hand, set it down, his eyes fixed on the gentle dance of light and shadow. Marianne felt a connection forming, not just with the cave, but with the people who had pressed their lives into it so long ago. She could sense the continuity, the hands that rose from the walls, the spirals that traced themselves across stone, the pillar glowing with amber memory. All of it was part of a single, deliberate pattern. "The spirals, they're a guide," she whispered. "A path through time and memory. They show us how to move with the cave, how to be part of its story rather than just witnesses." The pillar pulsed in agreement, its amber glow extending faint tendrils of light that seemed to stretch toward each of them. The silhouettes inside mirrored their movements, hands tracing the arcs and lines, guiding, teaching, welcoming. Marianne realized that the cave's memory was not static, it was participatory. It required attention, presence, and response. As they moved together with the spirals, a soft chorus of sounds emerged, the hum beneath their feet layered with whispering tones, overlapping, blending, and harmonizing. It was not words, but a symphony of memory, carrying both sorrow and hope, fear and resilience. The chamber itself seemed to lean in, the shadows stretching and bending to follow their motions. Lian let out a quiet breath. "It's teaching connection," she said. "How everything, hand, wall, memory, light, is tied together. How we are tied to it and to each other. Marianne nodded, feeling the truth of it in her bones. The spirals, the hands, the pillar, they were not separate entities. They were one continuous pulse of history, and by moving with them, they were participating in that flow. Every gesture, every breath, every heartbeat became part of the rhythm of the cave. The light from the pillar dimmed slightly, then brightened again in gentle waves, pulsing as if to say, "Continue, follow the spiral, remember, connect." She extended her hands toward the nearest floating hand, following the curve of the spiral in the air. The touch was warmer than before, a soft vibration that threaded through her body and joined the collective pulse of the chamber. The other hands followed, circling, echoing, lifting, and dipping in perfect harmony. And in that moment, Marianne understood fully they were no longer just explorers. They were conduits, bridges between the memory of the past and the presence of now, moving together in the spiral of connection that had waited centuries to be completed. The chamber seemed to breathe around them, alive with the gentle rhythm of the hands, the pillar, and the spirals. Marianne's eyes drifted over the walls again, and she noticed something new. The colors of the painted figures were shifting subtly, glowing and fading in delicate waves. Reds deepened into earthy crimsons, ochres warmed into golden amber, blacks softened into smoke-like greys. It was as if the cave itself was speaking in color. Each hue carried a weight, a message that Marianne could not yet name, but could feel. The deer on the wall stretched its legs in slow, deliberate motion, the hunter's arms extended, frozen mid-step, all movements accompanied by subtle changes in color. Liane's voice was soft, awed. "It's like the pigment is singing. Each color is a note, each shade a different vibration."
"It's not just movement, it's language." Marianne reached out toward the nearest shifting figure. The moment her gloved hand hovered above it, the color pulsed brighter, radiating warmth. She felt it against her fingertips, a vibration that traveled up her arm and mingled with the pulse she had felt from the pillar. She gasped softly, overwhelmed by the sensation, fear, awe, and an ineffable tenderness all intertwined. Jonas stepped closer, eyes fixed on the hunter's spear.
The pigment along the weapon shimmered in slow gradients, black to red to soft ochre, pulsing in a pattern that mirrored the hum beneath their feet. "It's talking to us," he whispered. "Not in words, but in light, in color, in movement. Everything here is communication." The pillar flared gently, and Marianne felt the energy surge through the circle. The floating hands lifted higher, rotating slowly, their own glowing pigment shifting in harmony with the walls. Every part of the chamber responded to their presence, bending the past into a gentle dance with the present. Marianne let her arms float outward, tracing arcs in the air, feeling the currents of color and warmth respond. The cave's memory wasn't passive. It was interactive, inviting them to participate, to learn, to become part of its story. Liane's voice rose again, trembling with wonder. "It's beautiful, and it's alive. The colors, they're whispering everything. The survival, the fear, the hope, they're all here." Marianne closed her eyes and let herself feel it fully. The color pulsed in her mind's eye, each shift a soft whisper of the lives that had come before, of hands pressed into pigment, of torches casting flickering shadows over the stone. She realized the cave was teaching them to listen with more than ears. Eric stepped forward slowly, still captivated but cautiously. I can see it, feel it. Even through the camera, it's like the colors reach into you. They're alive, like the walls are breathing. Marianne nodded. Yes, the cave isn't just a container of memory. It's a living archive, a guardian of life, a teacher. And it's guiding us through its lessons, one whisper, one pulse, one color at a time. The hum softened, a gentle lull, as the colors on the walls shifted into patterns that reflected the harmony of the chamber. The amber light of the pillar joined them, spilling golden warmth across the team, enfolding them in the living memory of the cave. And for the first time, Marianne understood the true depth of what they had found. The cave didn't merely preserve the past. It spoke, it felt, it remembered. And now it had chosen them to hear its story. The chamber grew quieter, yet the quiet was filled with presence. Marianne noticed the subtle rise and fall of the walls, the gentle shiver of pigment across the murals, and the hovering hands that pulsed in the soft red glow. The cave's heartbeat had slowed into a steady rhythm, almost like a slow, calming breath. Marianne placed her palms lightly against the floor. The warmth spread immediately, traveling up through her arms into her chest, and finally settling deep within her core. She could feel it everywhere, the vibration of stone, pigment, and air coalescing into a singular, gentle pulse. It was as though the cave itself were inhaling, holding its memory inside, and exhaling stories into their presence. Jonas knelt beside her, fingertips brushing the soft spiral of a mural. "It's like they're breathing through the walls," he whispered. "The people who made this, they left part of themselves here. And now the cave is letting us feel it." Marianne nodded. Every handprint, every spiral, every stroke of pigment, it's all connected. The cave carries them like breath, sustaining the memory of their lives, their fears, their love for the world around them. The amber pillar pulsed brighter, and inside, the silhouettes of the first painters moved in tandem with the chamber's rhythm. Their motions were calm, deliberate, flowing like water. Hands lifted, touched walls, pressed into pigment, tracing patterns of spirals and animals, whispering the stories of survival. Marianne felt each motion as a vibration within her, as if her own heartbeat had merged with theirs. The floating hands rose higher, circling above them like guardians. Each pulse radiated warmth and light, brushing against the team with a gentle insistence. Liane's fingers hovered over a glowing spiral, feeling the movement, the breath of the cave, the echo of lives long gone. "It's like they're showing us how to inhale memory," she said softly. "How to take in what they preserved and carry it forward." Eric's voice was low, almost reverent. "It's comforting. Like the cave knows us, knows what we need to understand, and it's guiding us gently, step by step." Marianne closed her eyes and let the cave's breath fill her lungs. She could feel the ancient presence exhaling into her, a wave of stories, knowledge, and emotion that flowed through her like liquid warmth. The shadows on the walls softened, the colors shifted into gentle hues, and the floating hands swayed with the rhythm of the collective pulse. The team remained silent, participating in the cave's rhythm without words. Every movement, every breath, every glance around the chamber became part of the pulse. Time seemed to stretch, flowing slowly like amber light through water. The past and the present intertwined seamlessly, the lessons of survival, memory, and care becoming tangible through sensation, through presence. Marianne opened her eyes to see the pillar glowing steadily, the silhouettes of the ancients reaching out in motion and gesture. She understood now. The cave's breath was not just memory. It was a lifeline. It connected the living with the remembered, creating a bridge between centuries, carrying lessons of hope, endurance, and reverence for life itself. And as the pulse deepened, Marianne felt a gentle certainty. They were not merely visitors here. They were part of the breath, part of the rhythm, part of the circle that the cave had been maintaining for centuries, an unbroken chain of memory, guidance, and life. Marianne turned slowly, eyes tracing the far end of the chamber, where a narrow corridor stretched into shadow. Unlike the glowing murals and spiraling pillars of the main room, this passage was darker, the stone cooler underfoot. Yet the hum of the cave followed them, softer here, like a heartbeat filtered through distance. The team exchanged quiet glances. Jonas was the first to step forward, his lamp cutting a slender path of light along the jagged walls. "It's inviting us," he murmured. The others followed, each step measured, careful, as if the cave itself might judge the pace of their approach. The corridor was lined with smaller handprints, faint and ochre-colored, pressed into the stone at varying heights. Some were tiny, almost childlike, others broad and deliberate. Each one radiated a subtle warmth that Marianne could feel brushing against her fingers as she passed. The hum seemed to echo with each step, bouncing back in soft waves that mirrored the rhythm of their movements. Leanne's whisper came from the side. "It's an archive, a record, a path. Everything in this cave tells a story, but this corridor, it feels more intimate, personal, like it's meant for reflection." Marianne nodded, brushing her hand along the wall. The pigments shifted slightly under her touch, faint reds and browns swirling into golden undertones. It was as if each handprint carried not only the touch of a person long gone, but the memory of their breath, their hesitation, their hope. Eric raised his camera tentatively. "Even filming it doesn't capture it," he said, voice low. "It's not just visual, it's emotional, sensory. You have to feel it." Marianne stepped further along the corridor, and the air seemed to grow warmer, infused with faint scents of smoke, clay, and resin, the lingering aroma of fires long extinguished. Shadows danced along the walls in response to the flickering lanterns, but the patterns were deliberate, echoing the motions of the original hands pressed into stone. At the midpoint of the corridor, the walls opened slightly into a small alcove. Inside, a single large handprint dominated the surface, a deep red, larger than any they had seen, and encircled by a spiral that seemed to radiate outward like ripples in water. Marianne approached slowly. As her gloved hand hovered above it, the handprint pulsed gently, sending a warm vibration up her arm. She closed her eyes, and images unfolded. A family huddled together, the adults pressing their hands to the walls, children's hands joining in. They traced spirals, repeated patterns, sang quietly into the air. It was not fear they carried. It was care, love, and the desperate determination to be remembered. Jonas stepped beside her, whispering, "It's a a memory made physical. They left traces of themselves, hoping someone, anyone, would come to witness it. Marianne felt a slow, steady pulse through the floor and into her chest. The cave was breathing again, softly, steadily, like a lullaby carried across centuries. She reached out, pressing her palm gently against the ancient print, and the warmth bloomed through her entire body. She felt the hands that had pressed into the stone, the lives behind them, the rhythm of survival and remembrance flowing into her. The corridor seemed to embrace them, the walls vibrating subtly, the hum of the cave a gentle current of history, memory, and hope. The spiral around the handprint glowed faintly, pulsing in harmony with the pillar's light in the main chamber, linking the two spaces with invisible threads of motion, warmth, and life. Marianne breathed slowly, letting the sensation fill her. She understood. This was more than a passage. It was a bridge between past and present, between memory and living, between the cave and the world beyond. The corridor opened gradually into a wider chamber, its ceiling arching high above, like a cathedral carved in stone. Marianne felt the warmth shift here, more diffuse yet still pulsing gently, carrying the hum of the cave with it. The walls were crowded with hundreds of small figures, painted in ochres, reds, and deep browns. Each figure moved slightly, like a reflection in water, disturbed by the softest ripple. "This is overwhelming," whispered Leon. Her fingers hovered above the surface, careful not to touch. "The energy here, it's almost vocal. The walls are murmuring." Marianne moved closer, and the sensation grew. The hum intensified, layered with the faintest whispers of voices that weren't quite voices, soft, overlapping intonations, rising and falling in rhythm. She could feel the vibrations along her spine, the warmth along her arms, the gentle pull at her chest. The cave was speaking again, but this time it seemed intentional, precise. Eric lowered his camera, watching in awe. "I can't. It's like the walls themselves are alive. Not just the murals, but the stone." Marianne stepped closer, leaning her head toward the wall. The painted figures shifted minutely, small gestures that suggested motion, interaction, even emotion. She could almost hear the rhythm of footsteps, laughter, and quiet murmurs embedded in the pigment. Her gloved hand hovered above a figure of a seated elder, fingers tracing the space without touching. The wall responded, warmth blooming under her fingertips, and the softest whisper tickled her ears. "Remember, carry us. Keep the story." Jonas reached out tentatively, following her lead. His fingers brushed a small spiral next to the figures. It glowed faintly, and he felt the same pulse Marianne had, a flow of warmth, history, and guidance threading through him. "It's not just memory," he said softly. "It's instruction. They left this for someone to follow, to learn from." Marianne nodded. "Every figure, every gesture, every color, they're teaching us about their lives, about survival, about care. They are guiding our attention, shaping our experience so we understand the weight and rhythm of what they endured." The chamber seemed to pulse in response, the murals swaying subtly, the amber glow of the distant pillar threading through every shadow. The hum deepened, resonating in harmony with the movement of the figures, the spirals, and the floating hands they had left behind in the main chamber. A soft wind stirred through the space, carrying faint scents of smoke and wet earth. Marianne inhaled deeply, letting the aromas mingle with the vibrations in her chest. She felt centuries of memory pressing gently against her mind, not overwhelming, but instructing, reminding, and welcoming her. The cave, it breathes through its walls, she whispered, and through us. We are part of its circulation, part of its story now. Lian's eyes were wide, shimmering with the reflected light of the murals. It's like they're singing without sound, and we're learning the song by being here, by feeling it, by moving with it. The murmuring intensified, gentle and persistent. The figure's gestures shifted in rhythm with the pulse, drawing delicate arcs across the walls, spiraling toward the floor and up to the vaulted ceiling. Marianne realized that the cave's memory was dynamic. It responded, adjusted, and guided, constantly shaping the narrative for those who would bear witness. She let her hand hover over a painted spiral and felt the warmth thread upward, connecting her to the pillar, the floating hands, and the entire chamber. A single thought blossomed in her mind. The cave was not simply preserving history, it was teaching how to honor it, how to feel it, how to carry it forward with reverence and care. As Marianne and the team lingered in the murmuring chamber, the subtle vibrations beneath their feet shifted once more. The floating hands in the main chamber seemed to respond, their glow intensifying, reaching outward as if drawing the team back into the center. The cave was orchestrating them, guiding their movement with a gentle insistence. Marianne turned to see the murals along the walls of the chamber respond. Figures that had seemed static began to rise slightly, lifting from the pigment as if emboldened by their attention. Hunters, elders, children, all moved in soft, fluid arcs, their gestures careful and deliberate. The motion was slow, measured, almost ceremonial, and yet each movement radiated warmth and intent. Jonas whispered, awe in his voice. They're guarding the memory. Every figure here is a sentinel, a protector of what has been preserved. Marianne nodded, feeling the truth in his words. These figures were more than images, they were guardians, imbued with the care and love of their creators. The energy from the pillar pulsed through them, linking every hand, every figure, every spiral into a living network of memory and life. Lian stepped closer to one of the floating hands, extending her palm in quiet reverence. The hand hovered, warm and responsive, and then slowly, as if acknowledging her presence, it moved alongside her gesture. A subtle glow spread from its center, illuminating nearby figures on the wall. The murals shimmered in tandem, shadows shifting to mirror the motion of the hand, creating a delicate interplay of light and darkness. Eric, usually so skeptical, lowered his camera, captivated. It's like they're showing us how to navigate this space, how to honor it. Marianne breathed slowly, letting the warmth of the pillar and the hands wrap around her like a protective embrace. She realized that the cave's guardians were not static, they were responsive, teaching not just through sight, but through sensation, through rhythm, through presence. Every gesture, every pulse of light, every gentle shift of shadow was a lesson in reverence. A soft, almost imperceptible melody rose from the walls, the murmurings blending into a harmonious hum. It was not music in the conventional sense, but a resonance of memory, of life preserved, of care extended across centuries. Marianne felt it resonate in her chest, a gentle vibration that aligned her heartbeat with the cave's pulse. The cave, it's alive with intention, she murmured. These figures, the hands, the pillar, they aren't just reminders of the past, they're teachers. They're guardians guiding us to move with understanding and care. Leanne reached for a spiral painted near the floor. As her fingers hovered above it, the pigment brightened, radiating warmth into her hand. A slow, deliberate pattern of light spread along the walls, connecting the murals, the floating hands, and the pillar. The chamber seemed to exhale softly, a wave of gentle warmth and sound that enveloped the team. Marianne felt a profound calm settle over her. The guardians of light, the figures, the hands, the spirals, were not only preserving the memory of the cave's creators, but were extending it forward, entrusting the visitors with the responsibility of understanding, feeling, and carrying the story. And as the amber glow of the pillar spread, brushing against the walls and floating hands, Marianne understood fully. The cave was no longer just a place of memory. It was a living, breathing sanctuary, a circle of light and warmth, a protective embrace that welcomed them into its eternal rhythm. Marianne's gaze drifted from the glowing pillar to the shifting murals around the chamber, and she noticed something new. Faint threads of light connecting the painted figures, spirals, and floating hands. They wove delicately through the air, invisible at first, but when caught in the amber glow of the pillar, they shimmered like gossamer filaments.
These threads, Leanne whispered, pointing. They're linking everything. The hands, the murals, the pillar, they're all connected. Marianne reached out, letting her fingers hover just above one of the threads. A soft warmth tingled at her fingertips, and a sensation of gentle pulling ran up her arm. She felt herself drawn into the rhythm, the pulse of centuries, as though the cave were coaxing her into participation, teaching her how to navigate not just the space, but the memory embedded within it.
Jonas stepped closer, eyes wide with awe. It's beautiful. Every part of this cave is alive, like a network of memory and intention. The threads, they're telling us how everything fits together. Marianne nodded slowly. She felt each filament pulse with warmth, carrying the weight of the lives that had pressed pigment into the walls, the breath and motion of those who had survived the darkness that had consumed the sky above. She could sense the threads stretching through time, binding past to present, memory to living, the cave to those who entered it. The floating hands drifted closer to her, circling in harmony with the threads. Each hand pulsed gently as she moved along the paths of light, creating a subtle rhythm that synchronized with the hum beneath her feet. It was slow, deliberate, and comforting, a lullaby whispered in warmth and light. Eric, stepping lightly, whispered, "It's like walking through their consciousness. Each thread carries part of their experience, and if you follow it, you can feel it, understand it." Marianne closed her eyes and extended both hands, letting the threads weave through her fingers. She could feel the motion of long-ago lives, hands pressed to stone, pigments mixed with care, spirals traced over and over, breaths held in reverence. Each thread carried not only a gesture, but a lesson, how to survive, how to preserve, how to move with patience and attention. Lian's voice was soft, filled with wonder. The cave is teaching us to connect, not just with the past, but with each other, with the flow of life it has preserved. Marianne's breath slowed as she felt the threads intertwine with her own pulse, synchronizing the team to the cave's rhythm. She realized that the network of light and warmth was more than a guide. It was a living map of memory, urging them to honor, to learn, and to carry forward what had been entrusted to the cave. The pillar pulsed steadily, sending waves of amber light along the threads. The floating hands rose higher, circling in slow arcs, their glow reaching the ceiling and reflecting off every mural, every painted figure. The entire chamber seemed to exhale, the warmth and vibrations enveloping them completely, wrapping them in a tangible embrace of history, presence, and care. Marianne understood fully then these threads of memory were more than connection, they were invitation. Invitation to move slowly, to feel deeply, to witness fully. The cave was alive not just with the past, but with intention, urging them to step carefully into the flow of history and continue the circle of remembrance. The threads of memory shimmered around them like delicate streams of golden light, weaving through the chamber and connecting every figure, every spiral, and every floating hand. Marianne stepped forward slowly, letting the warmth of the threads guide her movements. Each step felt purposeful, deliberate, as if the cave itself were orchestrating their passage through the rhythm of its history. Jonas followed close behind, tracing a glowing filament that connected a hunter's hand to a small spiral near the floor. "They're guarding the threads," he whispered. "Every figure, every hand, every painted shape, it's like they're watching over this network of memory, protecting it." Marianne nodded, her gloved hand brushing along a thread. She felt the pulse travel through her fingers and up her arm, a warm, steady vibration that matched the hum beneath their feet. The floating hands above mirrored her movements, rising and falling in perfect synchrony, weaving a protective dance around the circle of threads. Lian reached out to a nearby spiral, fingertips hovering just above the ochre pigment. As she traced its curve with her attention, the spiral brightened slightly, sending a subtle ripple of light along the threads connecting it to the surrounding figures. "It's not just a network," she murmured. "It's alive. The cave is teaching us, guiding us, showing us how to honor what came before." The pillar pulsed softly, radiating amber warmth that spread through the chamber and traveled along the threads. Inside, the silhouettes of the first painters moved gracefully, pressing their hands into the stone, tracing spirals, reaching toward each other. Their gestures were mirrored by the floating hands, creating a harmony of motion, light, and memory. Marianne felt the weight of centuries settle gently in her chest. The cave's guardians were patient, protective, and deliberate. They were not merely preserving memory, they were ensuring that it was understood, respected, and carried forward. Every motion, every pulse of light, every gentle shift in the murals was a lesson in reverence, a teaching of care and continuity. Eric stepped carefully along one of the threads, eyes wide with wonder. "It's like we're walking through their consciousness," he whispered. "Each connection, each movement, it's a story, a life, a heartbeat we can feel." Marianne let her hands hover above two glowing threads, feeling them weave through her fingertips like liquid warmth. She understood now. The circle of guardians, the painted figures, the floating hands, the amber pillar, the spirals, was a living system. It thrived not in isolation, but through interaction, through attention, through conscious, reverent presence. The chamber seemed to respond to her understanding. Shadows softened, colors pulsed with gentle vibrancy, and the threads shimmered brighter, as if acknowledging their participation. The cave exhaled, carrying the soft hum of centuries, a lullaby of survival and hope, weaving them into the endless flow of memory. Marianne took a slow breath and whispered, almost to herself, "We are part of the circle now. We are guardians too." The floating hands rose higher, circling in perfect arcs, their glow bathing the entire chamber. Every mural, every spiral, every thread seemed to join in the rhythm, pulsing in quiet harmony. And for the first time, Marianne felt not just awe, but belonging, a profound sense of being intertwined with the cave, the past, and the living memory that had endured for centuries. As Marianne and the team moved deeper into the chamber, the light from the pillar cast long, trembling shadows across the walls. The figures in the murals shifted subtly, elongated and softened by the amber glow, their forms blending into one another in a slow, liquid dance. The cave seemed to pulse with a new energy, a current flowing beneath the surface, carrying warmth, memory, and motion along its unseen channels. Liane whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like a river. The shadows are flowing. They're alive, moving with purpose, with the rhythm of the cave." Marianne reached out to the nearest mural, fingertips hovering just above the painted hunter. The shadow beneath it rippled like water disturbed by a stone. She traced the contour of the figure with her eyes, following the flow of movement, feeling the pulse of history travel along her arm. Every step they took, every gentle motion of the hands or the pillar, caused a ripple to spread across the chamber, a soft wave of light and shadow that intertwined with the others. Jonas leaned close, his voice hushed. "The river. It's carrying the memories, the lives of those who were here before. Each shadow is a story, a heartbeat, a lesson. It flows through the cave, through us, through time itself." Marianne nodded slowly. The cave's rhythm enveloped her. The shadows were no longer just shapes on stone. They were vessels of emotion and guidance. Fear, hope, love, survival, and remembrance all flowed together in the liquid patterns, pulsing and weaving around the pillars, the hands and the spirals. Eric, standing slightly back, lowered his camera. "It's mesmerizing and calming. Even the fear, the darkness, they're part of the flow, part of the rhythm. The river carries everything gently, guiding us along." Marianne lifted her arms slowly, following the undulating current of shadows. The floating hands above mirrored her gestures, rising and dipping in perfect harmony with the flow. The amber pillar's glow extended in subtle waves, reaching along the floor and walls, connecting every shadow, figure, and spiral into a single, luminous stream. Liane's voice was soft, reverent. "We are moving with it now. Part of the river, part of the memory. The cave isn't just showing us the past, it's teaching us how to carry it, to flow with it." Marianne felt the warmth of the river thread through her fingertips, travel up her arms and settle in her chest. Each shadow, each ripple, was alive with intention. The cave was alive with understanding, patience, and care. They were participants in the current, conduits of memory flowing across centuries, learning how to navigate with gentleness and reverence. The team moved together, synchronized with the river of shadows. Time seemed to stretch and slow, the chamber a flowing sanctuary of light, shadow, warmth, and history. Every gesture, every breath, every step was absorbed into the current, folding them into the rhythm of the cave, into the pulse of memory that had endured for ages. Marianne whispered softly, almost to herself, "We are part of the river now, and the river is part of us." The shadows rippled one final slow wave, settling into delicate arcs of light and darkness that cradled them in the cave's gentle embrace. The pillar pulsed, the hands swayed, and the river of memory carried on, ceaseless, patient, eternal. Marianne lingered in the flowing river of shadows, letting the gentle currents of light and warmth move through her. Around her, the floating hands continued their measured dance, their soft glow brushing against the walls and illuminating the painted figures in a delicate amber hue. The cave seemed to hum with quiet approval, a lullaby of presence and memory that wrapped around the explorers like a comforting blanket. Liane extended her hand toward one of the hovering lights. The hand responded, descending slowly, circling her fingertips and pulsing in harmony with her heartbeat. "Every hand," she murmured, "is an echo of someone who was here. Each one is teaching, guiding, remembering." Marianne followed suit, letting her palms float just above two of the glowing hands. She could feel the vibrations running through her, subtle and rhythmic, like the faint pulse of distant drums. The warmth seeped into her arms, her chest, threading through her entire body. She imagined the ancient painters, their hands pressed to stone, and realized that these ethereal forms were their continuation, echoes made tangible in the present. Jonas knelt, fingertips brushing against the shadows flowing along the walls. "It's more than memory," he whispered. "It's connection. We can feel them, interact with them, understand them through our movements." Marianne nodded, feeling a serene calm settle deep within her. Each hand she touched, each gentle pulse she absorbed, carried not only instruction, but the weight of love and care. The cave had preserved the essence of its creators in motion and light, allowing anyone who entered to participate in the circle to become part of the continuum that had endured for centuries. Eric moved closer, silent now, watching the hands as they circled the room in a slow, protective orbit. "It's like they're guiding us through ourselves," he said softly. "Through the motions, the light, the pulse. They're teaching us patience, presence, respect." Marianne's eyes swept the chamber, noting the seamless harmony between the pillar, the floating hands, the murals, and the flowing shadows. Everything was interconnected. The cave was a living organism of memory, teaching through sensation, rhythm, and the careful choreography of light and motion. She lifted her arms, letting them trace gentle arcs through the space. The hands responded immediately, rising and lowering in perfect harmony, tracing her movements and reinforcing the rhythm of the chamber. The amber glow of the pillar spread outward, threading through the shadows and illuminating the spirals etched into the stone floor. Liane's voice floated softly, reverent. We're learning how to move with them, not against them. How to honor the memory, the lives, the presence that remains here. Marianne closed her eyes and allowed the echo of hands to envelop her completely. She felt the gentle rise and fall, the warmth of centuries, the guidance threaded through motion and light. She understood fully now. These hands were more than guardians. They were teachers, a bridge connecting the past with the present, instructing those who were willing to slow down, to feel, and to remember. The cave pulsed gently around them, a rhythmic heartbeat of light, warmth, and motion. Marianne opened her eyes to see the hands circling steadily, the shadows flowing like water, the pillar glowing with amber certainty. In that luminous embrace, she felt a deep, abiding peace, a connection to everything that had been and everything that would be carried forward by those who truly witnessed the cave's memory. The flow of shadows and the circling hands guided Marianne and the team toward a quieter section of the cavern, a chamber that opened like a secret held deep within the stone. The ceiling arched high above, dotted with faint, luminescent patches that shimmered like distant stars. The floor was smooth and cool beneath their boots, reflecting the amber glow of the pillar from the previous chamber, creating the illusion of standing atop a calm, glowing lake. Marianne's breath slowed as she stepped fully inside. The air here felt different, denser yet lighter at the same time, imbued with the lingering warmth of countless generations. She could feel the pulse of the cave, less as a beat and more as a tide, rolling gently beneath their feet, surrounding them with presence and memory. Leanne knelt beside a shallow depression in the stone floor, tracing the delicate spiral etched into it. "This feels like a space for contemplation," she whispered. "Not just learning, but understanding, not just moving, but feeling." Marianne walked along the walls, observing the murals. Here the painted figures were quieter, less animated than in the main chamber. Families huddled, children reached for parents' hands, hunters rested their spears. The shadows of the figures stretched and shimmered gently, reflecting the slow pulse of the cave. Each brushstroke, each handprint, each spiral seemed imbued with intention, a deliberate invitation to pause, reflect, and absorb. Jonas crouched beside her, pointing to a series of overlapping handprints along the wall. They're older," he said softly. "Fainter, but somehow more vivid in memory. It's like they've been waiting for someone to notice, to acknowledge them." Marianne reached out, gloved fingers hovering over the handprints. A soft warmth radiated into her palm, gentle and insistent. The pulse of the cave threaded through her, carrying with it the echoes of the lives that had left their mark. She felt the rhythm of breaths, the weight of gestures, the quiet persistence of presence. It was both grounding and uplifting, a tender reminder that memory is alive when it is honored. Eric's voice broke the silence, almost reverent. "It's like looking into their lives, seeing the moments they preserved, feeling the care they put into every gesture." Marianne nodded, tracing her fingertips along a spiral etched beside the handprints. The pigment glimmered faintly beneath her touch, and the warmth spread through her chest, radiating outward like gentle sunlight. She felt herself drawn into the cave's rhythm, each breath and heartbeat aligned with its steady, patient pulse. Leon whispered, "This chamber, It's a mirror, not just of the past, but of ourselves. It shows us how to be present, how to honor, how to carry the story forward. Marianne closed her eyes, letting the hum of the cave fill her entirely. The hands above, the shadows around, the pillars of amber, each element was in delicate harmony, a lullaby of memory and care. She understood. To move through the cave was to move with intention, to reflect deeply, to let the river of centuries flow through you without rushing, without fear. In the chamber of reflection, the team found calm and understanding. Time seemed to stretch and fold, past and present, mingling in the quiet pulse of amber light and warmth. And Marianne realized that they were no longer simply explorers, they were witnesses, participants and custodians, entrusted with the responsibility of honoring the living memory of the cave. The team remained in the chamber of reflection for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle over them like a soft blanket. The amber glow from the pillar in the previous chamber spilled faintly into this space, painting the walls with gentle warmth. Marianne felt her heartbeat slow, sinking subtly with the hum beneath the stone floor. The cave's pulse was no longer just a distant rhythm. It was immediate, intimate, flowing through her, through them, through everything in the chamber. Marianne extended her arms slowly, palms open, and the floating hands responded. They circled around her, dipping and rising in fluid arcs that mirrored her movements. She felt the gentle pressure of warmth against her skin, a tender acknowledgement of her presence. Each movement she made was mirrored by the cave itself, a silent lesson in attention and harmony. Leanne knelt and placed her hand above a small spiral on the floor. The pigment shimmered softly, radiating a warmth that traced upward through her arm and into her chest. "It's teaching presence," she whispered. "Not just seeing, not just moving, being, feeling every pulse, every thread, every hand." Jonas stood close by, tracing the arches of the ceiling with his eyes. "Every part of this cave reacts to us," he murmured. "It's like it's alive, but also patient, guiding us slowly to understand." Marianne closed her eyes and felt herself drawn inward. The cave's pulse entwined with her own breath, each inhalation carrying the weight of memory, each exhalation releasing gentle light into the space. She could feel centuries of care, survival, and remembrance flowing through her fingertips, through her palms, through her very bones. The cave was teaching them not only how to witness, but how to exist within memory with reverence and calm. Eric stepped closer, speaking softly. "It's calming, like the cave is asking us to slow down, to absorb, to understand the rhythm of all that came before." Marianne opened her eyes to see the walls shimmering with subtle motion. The painted figures, the shadows, the threads of light, and the floating hands all moved in delicate choreography. The cave's presence was a gentle teacher, guiding them to become one with its rhythm, to inhabit the space with respect and intention. She took a slow step forward, then another, letting the pulse guide her movement. The amber glow deepened slightly, and the cave responded with a gentle swell of warmth. Each pulse, each wave of light seemed to whisper, "You are part of this. You are here. Be mindful. Be present." Leanne mirrored her steps, Jonas followed carefully, and even Eric allowed himself to be absorbed in the cadence of the cave. The chamber of reflection became not just a space to observe, but a space to feel. Every breath, every heartbeat, every motion was a conversation between them and the cave, a dialogue that transcended words and time. Marianne realized with a quiet reverence that the true lesson of the cave was not just memory, not just preservation, it was presence. To honor the past, they had to exist fully in the now, to let the pulse of life and memory merge within them, and to carry that awareness forward with care. And as the floating hands circled gently above, as the amber glow washed over the chamber, Marianne allowed herself to simply be connected, aware, and utterly immersed in the living rhythm of the cave of painted shadows. The chamber seemed to deepen around them, the walls stretching upward as if to cradle the team in a protective embrace. Marianne noticed that every spiral, every painted handprint, every figure now appeared subtly connected by delicate lines of faint light weaving across the walls, floor, and ceiling. These threads shimmered softly in the amber glow like traces of the cave's heartbeat made visible. This is the spiral, Leanne whispered, voice full of awe. It's not just a shape, it's continuity. Life flowing through time, preserved here. Marianne stepped closer to a spiral etched into the floor, tracing its curve with her fingers. The warmth pulsed through her hand, traveling along her arm and through her chest like a river of light. She could feel centuries of motion embedded in it, the careful tracing of hands, the deliberate arcs pressed into stone, the collective breath of generations. The cave wasn't just preserving these movements, it was teaching them, inviting anyone who entered to continue the rhythm, to honor the flow. Jonas knelt beside her, tracing the spirals that connected the painted figures. It's a map of everything, he murmured, of their lives, their care, their memory. Every gesture threads into the next, endlessly, like a chain we're now part of. Marianne lifted her hands, following the path of the spiral in the air. The floating hands rose to meet her movements, their glow intensifying as they mirrored her gestures. Each motion was amplified by the gentle hum of the cave, the amber light pulsing in time with their breaths. It was as if the cave itself were guiding them through the spiral, teaching them how to move with patience, attention, and reverence. Leanne reached for a nearby spiral on the wall, fingertips hovering above the pigment. The spiral brightened slightly, sending subtle pulses along the connecting threads, illuminating figures, murals, and floating hands in soft waves. The cave, it's showing us how everything connects, she whispered. Every life, every memory, every gesture, it flows into the next like a continuous spiral. Marianne felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of the lesson. The cave's memory was not static, it was alive, breathing, and interactive. Every step they took, every gesture they made, became part of the eternal rhythm of the spiral. They were not merely visitors, they were participants, entrusted with the responsibility to honor, preserve, and continue the flow. Eric stepped carefully along the illuminated threads, his camera set aside. It's comforting, he said softly. Like the spiral is reminding us that nothing is lost, nothing is separate. Every part matters, Every part is remembered. Marianne nodded, letting her hands drift above the threads, feeling them pulse with warmth and history. The chamber seemed to respond to their awareness, the amber glow spreading gently, illuminating every corner of the space. The spirals, the murals, the floating hands, and the threads of memory all moved in delicate synchrony, guiding them through the cave's lesson, continuity, connection, and presence. And as the pulse of the cave flowed through them, Marianne felt a profound sense of belonging. The spiral was not merely a pattern in stone, it was the cave's way of entrusting them with its legacy, showing them how to move with care, reverence, and quiet awareness, carrying the memory of the past into the present and into the future. The chamber seemed to sigh around them, the air thick with warmth and the subtle scent of earth and resin. The spirals of light and pigment wove through the room, connecting walls, floor, and ceiling, while the floating hands circled above, glowing gently as if blessing every step the team took. Marianne could feel the pulse of the cave in her chest, steady and unrelenting like a heartbeat that stretched across centuries. She reached out toward a shadow that flickered along the far wall. As her fingers brushed the air above it, the shadow thickened, folding into itself with a slow, deliberate grace. The warmth spread along her arms, threading through her entire body, and Marianne felt the presence of those who had lived, loved, and created within these walls. The shadows were no longer just echoes, they were companions, embracing her gently, inviting her into the rhythm of the cave. Leanne knelt beside a spiral painted into the stone floor, her palm hovering above the pigment. It pulsed softly in response, sending tiny waves of light along the walls, connecting the painted figures, the floating hands, and the threads of memory.
"They're embracing us," she whispered. "The cave, the past, the memory, it's all holding us together." Jonas moved slowly through the chamber, letting his hands glide above the spirals and shadows. Each time his fingers passed near a figure, it shifted gently, a subtle bow of acknowledgement. "It's teaching us gentleness," he murmured. "How to move without breaking the rhythm, without disturbing the care embedded here." Marianne felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the intimacy of the moment. The cave had become more than a repository of memory. It was alive with presence,
teaching them to participate in its flow, to honor every gesture, every handprint, every life preserved within its walls. Each shadow was a whisper of care, a quiet embrace extending across centuries. Eric stepped closer, lowering his camera. "It's like being wrapped in history," he said softly. "Not just seeing it, not just feeling it, but being held by it." Marianne took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another, letting the flow of shadows guide her. The floating hands arced above, their glow shifting in tandem with her movement. The amber light from the pillar spread in gentle waves, illuminating every mural, every spiral, every flickering shadow. The cave seemed to lean in, surrounding them with warmth, light, and memory. The hum beneath their feet pulsed gently, the rhythm of centuries echoing in their chests. Marianne reached out her hands to the threads of light weaving through the room, letting them flow through her fingers, arms, and heart. The pulse of the cave, the embrace of shadows, and the warmth of the guardians fused together into a perfect, quiet harmony. For the first time, Marianne felt wholly at peace in the cave. Every motion, every breath, every pulse of light and shadow became part of the rhythm of continuity. The past and present intertwined seamlessly, and the cave held them gently, teaching patience, care, and reverence for the fragile, enduring pulse of life. And in that luminous embrace, Marianne understood fully. They were part of the story now, held by the shadows, guided by the hands, and carried along the spirals of memory. The cave's pulse had become theirs, and theirs had become the cave's, a living, gentle cycle of remembrance, understanding, and quiet hope. The chamber seemed to exhale, a soft, lingering sigh that filled every corner with warmth and gentle light. Marianne stood quietly, letting the amber glow of the pillar wash over her, the floating hand circling above in a slow, protective dance. The shadows on the walls shimmered faintly, tracing the movements of the painted figures and the spirals of light along the floor. Time itself seemed to pause, folding the past and present together in one serene, eternal moment. Marianne extended her hand slowly, feeling the threads of memory wind gently through her fingers. Each pulse was a whisper of lives long gone, hands pressed to stone, breath held in reverence, gestures made with care and hope. The cave was speaking once more, but now Marianne understood fully. It was not only a chamber of memory, it was a sanctuary of continuity, a living bridge between those who had been and those who would come. Leanne knelt beside her, eyes closed, letting the pulse flow through her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "We're part of it now, part of the memory, part of the light, part of the rhythm." Jonas traced a final arc through the air, following the threads of the spirals. "It's teaching us how to leave nothing behind, how to honor everything, how to carry the story forward." Marianne breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of the cave settle deep into her chest, radiating outward to fill her with a sense of calm, understanding, and belonging. The floating hands rose higher, their glow softening, as if preparing to release them gently back into the world outside. The amber pillar pulsed one last time, steady and certain, and the shadows rippled in harmonious farewell. Eric, standing quietly, lowered his camera and smiled softly. "It's like the cave is letting us go, trusting us to carry it forward." Marianne nodded, eyes tracing the flowing threads one last time. "We will remember," she said softly. "We will honor this place, these lives, this pulse, and we will carry it gently, always." The cave responded with a final wave of warmth and light, the floating hands dipping in a protective arc, the shadows settling into delicate patterns across the walls. The spirals glimmered faintly, whispering continuity, connection, and hope. Marianne felt the pulse fade slowly, not gone but gently receding into the stone, the air, and the memories embedded within. As they turned to leave, the chamber seemed to hold its breath, a silent acknowledgement of their presence, a quiet blessing for the care they had shown. Marianne took a slow, last step forward, feeling the embrace of the cave linger like a soft, comforting heartbeat. Outside the chamber, the world felt warmer, quieter, and more profound. The memory of the cave, the pulse of its guardians, and the river of shadows remained within them, an eternal rhythm threaded into their very beings. And as Marianne, Leon, Jonas, and Eric stepped back into the open air, she felt a deep, abiding gratitude for the cave, for the lives it had preserved, for the lessons whispered through light, shadow, and motion. Thank you for joining this journey into the Cave of Painted Shadows. Let the warmth of the cave, the pulse of memory, and the gentle rhythm of its guardians carry you into rest. Feel the calm settle deep into your chest, the echoes of history wrapping softly around you, and allow your mind to drift gently into quiet reflection. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Share your thoughts and feelings wherever you are, whether you are watching from the US, Europe, or elsewhere in the world. At any hour you find yourself here, the story lives on through your attention and care, and your presence becomes part of the circle of memory that the cave has maintained for centuries. Close your eyes, take a slow, steady breath, and let the last light of the cave guide you into peaceful rest.